It's a story that's been stoking imagination, adrenaline, and adventure for 90 years. The ultimate sci-fi horror classic, and it just got another go at the silver screen. But while the D-Rex has been busy dominating memes, social media, and box offices, science has been getting its hands dirty with a very different kind of rebirth. Biotechnology has come a long way since Jurassic Park hit theaters in 1993. And cutting-edge tools like gene editing are opening up possibilities that were way beyond our wildest dreams back then. But with companies celebrating milestones in de-extinction, is the world ready for the return of the dinosaurs? How much did the movies get right? How possible is it, really, that we could meet a woolly mammoth one day soon? And if we did, how would animals that thrived so far in the past fit into today's world? Or could they? Join me as we unravel some of these questions and more, and enter the Codex Legendarium. I'm Shelby Melanson. Real-life efforts to bring back dinosaurs are already in the works, but before we get into the science of gene editing, how lifelike are the residents of Jurassic Park, really? NASA actually put it on a list of the most accurate sci-fi movies, giving it a respectable 7th place. Let's look at a few things the movies got right and not so right. T-Rex had great vision and strong senses of hearing and smell, so hiding from it was probably a no-go. Running away might have been a slightly better option since T-Rex was a walk, not run kind of predator and probably wasn't chasing prey over long distances. But that's all based on computer simulations looking at muscle, weight, and skeleton strength. That said, it was still faster than most humans, and running away from one would have been terrifying. There's also good news and bad news for the original terror of Jurassic Park. In Jurassic World, Blue the raptor was shown to be super smart, creative, and cunning, and that was also probably spot on with real life. Raptor skulls have room for big brains, which is awesome because, let's be honest, we all love Blue and Beta. Here's where the bad news comes in. Velociraptors in Jurassic aren't really velociraptors. Instead, they're mostly based on a species called the Deinonychus. Raptors are way smaller, and they would have been closer to the size of a dog or a duck, and might have also had feathers. The movies chose to swap the two basically because Velociraptor is a cooler name, and okay, fair play on that one. Something else that suffers from the cool name syndrome, most of the animals depicted in these movies were from the Cretaceous period, not the Jurassic, which came before. A couple other unfortunate realities, mosasaurs were way smaller than we thought, and unfortunately, not even Rexy could roar. Yeah. I know, really puts a damper on some of those scenes. Judging by that, Jurassic did make serious efforts to embrace realism. The filmmakers actually confirmed this too, but we still need a disclaimer here. The movies highlight a lot of what paleontology believed at the time, but what paleontology believes changes all the time. Mostly because all we have to go on are puzzle pieces from millions of years ago. Memes about this got thrown around a lot a few years back, but let's not forget, when you x-ray a beaver, the tail looks like this. Now, of course, context matters, and plenty of fossils have small clues that provide more info than may meet the eye. Like how well-preserved bones usually show how muscles attach to them. But it's completely reasonable to assume that we could easily get a lot of things wrong about this, and science is, again, constantly changing its theories on what these animals actually looked like. Where things stand now, supposedly, a lot of them had feathers, including raptors like we mentioned before, but also a cousin of the T-Rex, too. Let's talk about the mammoth in the room. Could we ever actually recover dinosaur DNA? And could we use it to recreate extinct animals? Here's the main sticking point that has scientists saying no. In order to clone an animal, you need the entire genome. That's all of the data contained in one cell and the complete set of DNA for whatever living thing it came from. The trouble with biological material is an obvious one. It tends to degrade, and because of that, there isn't much left of it. In an interview, Smithsonian researcher Dr. Logan Kistler explained it like this, quote, "If you were able to store DNA on the dark side of the moon, it could remain stable for millions of years. But on Earth, it cannot survive for long, even in permafrost." A study back in 2012 took a closer look at exactly how fast DNA degrades. It looked at the bones of a moa, a somewhat recently extinct bird that we're going to talk more about later. The study found that genetic material has a half-life of about 521 years, meaning it loses half its genetic info every half millennia. If you do the math, that means the oldest DNA that we could recover, in theory, would be from about 6.8 million years ago. That presents a pretty big dilemma if we want to bring back our friends the T-Rex and Triceratops. The Cretaceous period ended around 65 million years ago. In other words, 58 million years too late for DNA recovery. So, is that it? Is that the end of the road? Maybe not. Dr. Malcolm said it best.
Life will not be contained. Life breaks free, it expands to new territories. Life finds a way.
So, degraded DNA is bad news for our famous mosquito, right? The answer is kind of. Amber actually does a great job of preserving things, but typically only the hard parts of things, like outer shells, not so much soft tissue. But the jig may not totally be up for our mosquito either. Amber might not be the ticket, but it's also not the only way things get preserved from prehistory. Check out this paper from 2013. It describes how researchers found a preserved 450 million year old mosquito inside the sediment at the bottom of a lake. Inside its body, they found a red pigment, which came from none other than hemoglobin. Yeah, that's right, blood. Or at least the remnants of it. That mosquito is still 20 million years short of the dinosaur age, but the point is this. A paleontologist from London's Natural History Museum said this, quote, "The idea that we may one day find a mosquito or a biting fly from the Mesozoic with some parts of the blood still preserved is not outrageous." Here's where it gets crazy. She was right. In 2015, her team actually did find red blood cells inside a dinosaur bone from the Cretaceous period, the same era that Jurassic Park is set in. A few years after that, another research team found basically the same thing, a 125 million year old dinosaur bird bone from a bird that lived in what we now know as Northeast China. A small clump of cells was stuck to that bone, and inside they found preserved threads of DNA. Besides the meat-eating bird, the same research team also found trace evidence of proteins, chromosomes, and chemical markers of DNA from a duck-billed dinosaur around 70 million years ago. This partially intact biomaterial is so rare that researchers do not understand how it's possible that it survived. But the thing is, scientists very regularly make discoveries that totally defy what science thinks is possible. You just don't hear about them as much. If those finds are true, it would completely change our understanding of how fragments of prehistory might have been able to survive. In some cases, for tens of millions of years longer than we thought they could. It could also reveal a better glimpse into what life from another era was like. And this really isn't far-fetched. We already know that certain materials help keep things fresh. The whole mosquito lake bed find is kind of a no-brainer since we already know all about the staying power of bogs. Shout out to Irish bog butter on this one. Other theories say getting buried in volcanic ash might also be able to keep cells preserved for way longer than we thought. All that said, if these tiny genetic markers were able to survive, we're still just talking about small tatters or fragments of DNA sequences. These broken down remnants would still be way too degraded and have too many gaps to actually be read and used for sequencing. So how did Jurassic Park deal with that? Well, according to Dr. Henry Wu, InGen simply filled in those gaps with frog DNA. Compare that to real life, and off-screen scientists say frogs would be the wrong choice. Birds would work better since they, too, are technically dinosaurs. The bigger problem is that with only small pieces of a DNA genome, instead of the whole thing, you wouldn't actually know where the holes are that need to be filled in. So time is still the biggest obstacle. But not all dinosaurs vanished 60 million years ago either. So what if we extend the idea of Jurassic's realism to more recently extinct species? And what if instead of cloning a dinosaur, we reverse engineered one? By starting with an animal that's alive today and going backwards. Enter the De-Extinction project, run by genetics company Colossal Bioscience. The premise is this: take a species that sang their last song on Earth a little more recently and go backwards. That means using living relatives as a base to bring them back. What's interesting is that some of the species they're looking to bring back actually died off so recently that they lived amongst humans a few thousand years ago. And one of the most famous is already on the way. The woolly mammoth, or as Colossal calls its version, a cold-resistant elephant with all of the core biological traits of the woolly mammoth. So how could this actually work? Colossal says a few things make the project possible in the first place. One, that mammoths were around as recently as 4,000 years ago. And two, because they lived in areas of permafrost. Mammoth remains are extremely well preserved with salvageable DNA. Here's Colossal's plan. Pick out cold weather mammoth genes like shaggy hair and curved tusks and use CRISPR gene editing to combine them with the genome of its closest living relative, the Asian elephant. The two actually share a 99.4% DNA match. From there, use the magic of IVF, wait 22 months, and boom, a woolly mammoth calf. You might have already seen its first test subject, the woolly mouse. Colossal wants to bring back the mammoth by 2028. And if that sounds a little confident to you, it's because the company is still coming off of the alleged success of an earlier project. Earlier this year, Colossal brought back another Ice Age species, and although it's a lot less dinosaur-esque, it has an almost mythical history. The direwolf first went mainstream in 2011, thanks to a little show you might have heard of called Game of Thrones. But fantasy lovers were weaving this into stories way before that. We're talking tabletop games like Dungeons & Dragons and Magic the Gathering, video games like Ark Survival Evolved, Diablo 4, and World of Warcraft. And if music is more your scene, you might know it from the namesake Grateful Dead song. For sports fans, Tom Brady is a Colossal investor and backed the direwolf project. And of course, we can't forget the original Grimm brothers with Little Red Riding Hood. But outside fantasy and sci-fi, the apex predator prowled the Earth as of around 10,000 years ago. And unlike the mammoth, direwolves haven't had a genetically similar relative in millennia. To deal with that problem, Colossal took DNA from a 13,000-year-old tooth and a 72,000-year-old skull, and used what it calls a resampling process to generate what was missing. The result? Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi. The male twins are affectionately named after the twin brothers raised by a she-wolf that founded the Roman Empire. And the female pup carries the title for Queen from Game of Thrones. But not without some controversy. Others in the bioengineering field say the 3 direwolf pups aren't actually direwolves. They're gray wolf hybrids, genetically modified with a few direwolf traits, like long white fur and a larger skull. But still, a completely different genus. Despite that, Colossal is still pushing. Next on the list for de-extinction is a giant ostrich. Kind of. It's called the moa, a 12-foot-tall flightless bird native to New Zealand that vanished around 500 years ago in 1445. Filmmaker Peter Jackson is teaming up with Colossal to bankroll the project. You might know him as the director behind the Lord of the Rings movies and The Hobbit. Right now, the plan is to compare the moa's genes to birds like the emu and go from there. Other species primed for de-extinction are the Tasmanian tiger, and a bird so unique that for a long time, people actually thought it was a myth. The beloved dodo bird. Colossal is already working with a laundry list of other startups and companies on related work, including animal cloning. And the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance now operates what it calls a frozen zoo. essentially a biological seed bank but for DNA, including some from already extinct animals. These creatures may not be as eye-catching to us as dinosaurs are, except maybe the mammoth. But bringing them back still poses similar questions. If they do come back, where would they go? And what could an actual Jurassic Park be like? The most obvious idea based on the movies is to essentially have a dinosaur zoo. Although, unlike Jurassic Park, you'd probably want to beef up the enclosures a little, since in some places, all that was keeping Rexy inside was an electric fence. Probably not the best approach. Personally, the idea of keeping an entire species inside one single zoo brings up some other issues though, like, what's the purpose of bringing something back from the dead if not one single animal can participate in the world outside of a cage? Just as a scientific marvel to say, we did it? Colossal says it wants to reintegrate de-extinct animals into what was once their natural habitat, like the mammoth. But how would that work? And would it actually help the environment? Elephants are a keystone species and play a big role in keeping their habitats healthy. When mammoths went extinct, there were no more gentle giants to stomp around and remove the snow from the ground. Without that, the snow actually keeps the ground warm and thaws out permafrost. Colossal argues bringing the mammoths back to today's Arctic tundra would revive that ecosystem and have a positive impact on climate. But plenty of other scientists say there's no evidence it would make a difference, or say it could backfire. Because after all, those habitats have been adapting without mammoths for thousands of years. So adding them back in could cause unexpected complications at best. Not to mention, there's no guarantee they'd actually survive there. The same thing applies to the moa. Supporters say bringing the giant birds back to New Zealand would help plant life flourish. On the other hand, dropping an apex predator with giant legs and huge talons back into an environment may come with some dangers. But what if they had a place that was isolated from the rest of the world? A real-life Isla Sorna? In theory, you could pick a nice tropical island just like Jurassic Park did. Something like Mauritius Island, aka former home of none other than the dodo bird. The island was literally so nice that over time, the birds forgot how to fly and lost all their fear because they had no predators. As dumb as a dodo was actually more like as friendly as a dodo. Or if the whole island situation doesn't work out, you could also dig a really deep trench to keep the revived dinosaurs inside. But what if a place like that already existed? It's called Mount Roraima, at the crossroads between Brazil, Guyana, and Venezuela. It's where Sir Arthur Conan Doyle based his book, The Lost World, or the original inspiration for the Jurassic Park book and later the movies. And it's easy to see why. It looks like a floating island, sitting 3,000 feet high, cut off from the rest of the world, with no obvious way to get to it. A true lost world. It formed around 2 billion years ago, and its sheer isolation has frozen its summit in time for the past 70 to 90 billion years. And because of that, it's home to plants and animals that don't exist anywhere else on Earth. From orchids and carnivorous plants to bugs, birds, and reptiles. Here's how Doyle describes it in The Lost World. Quote, "What is the result? Why, the ordinary laws of nature are suspended. The various checks which influence the struggle for existence in the world at large are all neutralized or altered. Creatures survive which would otherwise disappear. Geologists call the formation House of the Gods in the region's indigenous language. And the name plays into its mythology, too. Those same indigenous people believed the base of the mountain is actually the stump of an enormous supernatural tree, and that all of the world's fruits and vegetables grow from it. As for what happened to it, legends say a mythical being cut it down, and where it fell came a massive flood. Since then, the tribes dare not climb the mountain." Speaking of Doyle's Lost World and the legends of the region, it wouldn't be right to skip over some other legends. Jurassic Park's story says extinct dinos could be brought back to life, but in The Lost World, the original inspiration, poses a different idea. That actually, dinosaurs never left. Quote, "Creatures which were supposed to be Jurassic, monsters who would hunt down and devour our largest and fiercest mammals still exist. And some local folklore tends to agree. The stories come with names like the Eater of Top Palms and the one who stops the flow of rivers. They describe a massive creature that lives in the Congo Basin in Africa. It's called the Mokele-mbembe. And according to legend, it's also a sauropod. If that name sounds familiar, it's because it describes some of the largest dinosaurs that ever walked the earth. Think Littlefoot and his family from The Land Before Time. And just like Littlefoot's love of tree stars, these Congo creatures were said to be herbivores yet territorial. Some stories actually call it a spirit, while others describe sightings of a real creature. The stories about them mostly come from French missionaries back in the 1700s. The earliest and most famous one reads, quote, "The missionaries have observed, passing along a forest, the trail of an animal they have not seen, but which must be monstrous. The marks of his claws were noted upon the earth, and these composed a footprint of about 3 feet in circumference. By observing the deposition of his footsteps, it was recognized that he was not running in his passage, and he carried his legs at the distance of 7 to 8 feet apart." Naturally, scientists staged multiple trips to the area later on to try and find it. Also naturally, they didn't find any hard evidence. They blamed the sightings on an unusually large species of African softshell turtle instead. The Lost World has a strong reaction to these kinds of scientific brush-offs too. Quote, "Every great discoverer has been met with the same incredulity, the sure brand of a generation of fools. When great facts are laid before you, you have not the intuition, the imagination, which would help you to understand them. You can only throw mud at the men who risked their lives to open new fields to science. You persecute the prophets." If I were a lost relic dinosaur, I probably wouldn't be coming out to visit the scientists either, but who knows? Okay, back to Jurassic Park. De-Extinction comes with some pretty major ethics questions. Things like, can or should a company own an entire species? How much unknown are we okay with, since realistically, we can't possibly predict what could happen to these animals? And is it right to bring creatures back into a world that is at best very different from the one they lived in naturally, and at worst, totally unsuitable for them? The plant and animal food sources these dinosaurs ate are also no longer around. And what about the social element? Mammoths, like elephants, were social animals. So what happens when you introduce one mammoth calf to a herd of elephants? Will the calf be accepted into the family or isolated? While I was researching this episode, an idea from one of the scientists we mentioned earlier really stood out to me. She writes, quote, "An animal that died out naturally, perhaps 150 million years ago, is not going to recognize anything in this world if you bring it back."
Well, the question is, how can you know anything about an extinct ecosystem? And therefore, how could you ever assume that you can control it? You have plants in this building that are poisonous. You pick them because they look good.
But these are aggressive living things that have no idea what century they're in, and they'll defend themselves violently if necessary.
Dinosaurs and man, 2 species separated by 65 million years of evolution, have just been suddenly thrown back into the mix together. How can we possibly have the slightest idea of what to expect?
And even before that point, the gene editing process itself comes with a whole lot of ifs. CRISPR is not a foolproof process, and it can have a lot of unintended effects on both the animals themselves and their environments. Long-term impacts are near impossible to predict, and safety is not always a guarantee. And for every argument that it could be used to help save endangered species and prevent disease is another, that in the wrong hands, it could also be used to harm or even engineer weapons. Jurassic World talks about that exact warning with the creation of the Indoraptor, a genetic mutant engineered as a military war machine. Besides that, the Indominus Rex brings up other issues, like vanity gene editing. That dino was essentially made as a circus attraction to boost theme park visitor numbers. Dr. Henry Wu sums it up well.
Nothing in Jurassic World is natural. We have always filled gaps in the genome with the DNA of other animals. And if their genetic code was pure, many of them would look quite different. But you didn't ask for reality. You asked for more teeth.
I never asked for a monster.
Looking at Jurassic's latest iteration, the D-Rex, or literally Distortus Rex, is probably the best example of all. 6 limbs, a bloated skull, and more teeth than it could ever need. The filmmakers who designed it said they actually wanted audiences to feel sorry for it as much as be terrified by it. I mean, we literally have dog breeds with massive health problems just because of selective breeding. You can't tell me this thing wouldn't be in pain.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
The Jurassic Park books and movies are beloved for a reason. Not only are they unique and exciting, they offer up the possibility of an unknown frontier, complete with danger, discovery, plenty of jump scares, and a major thrill. For right now, most of what we've talked about today is hypothetical, and thankfully, so are the big ethics questions. But they might not be for long. I noticed one major theme coming from a lot of the world's top scientists in the field. There might be an argument for reviving species that humans sent toward extinction. In other words, animals that could realistically find a home in the world today as it is now. But others say there's no backspace button for extinction, and that we should learn a lesson about not meddling with nature in the first place. Personally, I like the snippet from the original Jurassic Park book. Quote, "Like the medieval system before it, science is starting not to fit the world anymore. Science has attained so much power that its practical limits begin to be apparent. But science cannot help us decide what to do with that world, or how to live. Science can make a nuclear reactor, but it cannot tell us not to build it. Science can make pesticide, but it cannot tell us not to use it." Maybe we will see mammoths in a few years, but in the meantime, stories like these are a reminder to be careful with what we create. What do you think about a real-life Jurassic Park? Would it be like any other zoo, or more like a mystical island? And do you like the sound of de-extinction? Or is Jurassic Park a cautionary tale? And if you enjoyed this deep dive into mysteries, myths, culture, and science, drop us a like and subscribe. There's a lot more coming. Thank you.